You're looking at an old photo taken in 1898. At first, it seems harmless. A young boy, maybe 8 or 9, sits in a Victorian-style living room holding a porcelain doll. It looks sweet, like he's borrowing his sister's toy or posing for a family picture. That's what historians believed for more than a century. But in 2023, once experts used new digital tools to clear away years of damage, something hidden in the image came to light. It changed how the entire photograph was understood. What looked like a cute portrait turned out to be one of the most emotional images from the Victorian period. The boy wasn't playing. He was grieving. In early 2023, Dr. Marvichin, a digital archivist at the Library of Congress, was restoring a batch of Victorian photos when she came across this unusual cabinet card from 1898. It showed a boy dressed in dark clothing with knee-length pants, a dark jacket, and a white collar. He held a large porcelain doll, wearing a fancy white lace dress. Dr. Chin first labeled the photo simply as an unidentified boy with a toy from around 1898. She noted that boys playing with dolls wasn't rare during that time. She almost set the photo aside, but something about it felt off. The boy's expression wasn't playful. It was deeply serious. His arms were wrapped tightly around the doll, almost like he was guarding it. The whole scene felt formal, almost ceremonial. Because the photo was heavily worn and faded, she ran it through a high-resolution restoration process. More than a century of stains, fading, and surface damage had hidden many details. As she worked, important features began to appear. The boy's clothes were not ordinary. They were mourning clothes made of black crepe, a fabric families wore after a recent loss. A black armband on his left sleeve signaled the same thing. When the background became clearer, the room showed more signs of mourning. Black fabric covered the windows, and a framed photo on a nearby table was wrapped with a black ribbon. A vase held fresh flowers that looked like they had been arranged for a funeral. Then a small card near the bottom of the image became readable. After enhancement, Dr. Chin could make out part of the text. Memory of Clara, age 6, April 1898. The biggest discovery came when she zoomed in on the doll. Its face wasn't the usual simple painted style you'd expect from mass-produced dolls of that time. It looked incredibly detailed, almost like a portrait. The hair wasn't mohair or synthetic. It looked like real human hair, carefully styled. Dr. Chin reached out to experts in Victorian toys and mourning customs. After reviewing the details, they confirmed what she had begun to suspect. The doll wasn't a toy. It was a memorial doll created to look like a child who had passed away. On the back of the card, faint handwriting became visible after restoration. It read, Thomas Whitmore, age 8, with memorial. Likeness of his sister Clara, age 6, taken 3 weeks after her passing. Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, May 15, 1898. Photographer J.W. Black and Company. The photo was not a simple portrait of a boy with a doll. It showed Thomas holding a memorial effigy made to look like his younger sister Clara, who had died only weeks before. What once seemed like a charming Victorian scene was actually a heartbreaking moment of a child holding on to the memory of someone he loved. To understand why the Whitmore family created the doll, it helps to look at how families in the Victorian era handled loss, especially the loss of children. During the late 1890s, child deaths were sadly common. In the United States, about 1 in 5 children did not make it to age 5. Illnesses such as scarlet fever, diphtheria, tuberculosis, pneumonia, and whooping cough took many young lives each year. No family at the time, no matter how wealthy or poor, was safe from the risk of losing a child. This reality shaped Victorian mourning customs into a detailed set of traditions meant to show grief in public and help families manage their pain in private. When a child passed away, families often followed strict mourning rules that could last for years. Parents, especially mothers, wore full black clothing for at least a year. Homes were covered in black fabric. Mirrors were hidden, and clocks were sometimes stopped at the moment the child died. People paused social events and daily outings. In Victorian society, open grieving wasn't just accepted, it was expected. There were clear rules about what to wear, how to behave, and how long mourning should last. Ignoring these customs could cause public concern or judgment. Alongside these public traditions, Families look for personal ways to stay connected to the child they lost. Photography played a big role. Taking photos of someone after they had passed away was common, especially for families who could not afford pictures while the child was alive. These photos were usually gentle and peaceful, meant to look like the child was resting. They were viewed as cherished reminders, not as something frightening. Memorial dolls offered an even more physical way to remember a child. These dolls were not common because they were expensive and typically made for families with more resources. But for those who could afford them, the dolls served an important emotional purpose. The process of making a memorial doll was detailed and personal. A skilled craftsperson, often someone who normally created fine porcelain work, used photos of the child and input from the family. They shaped a clay version of the child's face, carefully matching unique features like eye shape, mouth, cheeks, and nose. The clay model became the mold for the porcelain head. Once fired in a kiln, the porcelain was painted by hand to match the child's skin tone, eye color, and lip color. Glass eyes were selected to match the child's real eye color. Most meaningful of all, the doll's hair was often made from the child's own hair, saved by the family. It was attached strand by strand using traditional wig-making techniques, giving the doll a real physical connection to the child. The doll was then dressed in clothing that matched what the child wore in life. Sometimes families chose outfits recreated in miniature, and sometimes they used the child's real clothing, altered to fit the doll. The cost could range from $50 to $200 at the time, equal to several months of wages for the average worker. These dolls filled many emotional roles. They gave grieving families something to hold, care for, and keep close. For siblings like Thomas, the doll helped maintain a sense of closeness to a brother or sister who was gone. Parents often found comfort in caring for the doll in small ways, which softened the shift from daily caregiving to sudden loss. Some families displayed the dolls in their homes for years. Others kept them stored safely, bringing them out on special dates or during difficult moments. A few mothers were even laid to rest with their child's memorial doll beside them, symbolizing an ongoing connection. By the early 1900s, childhood death rates began to drop thanks to better medicine and public health. As Victorian mourning customs faded and families adopted simpler practices, memorial dolls became less common. By the time World War I began, the tradition had nearly disappeared. Today, original Victorian memorial dolls are extremely rare. Museums and collectors see them as important reminders of a time when families faced the loss of children with both public rituals and deeply personal ways of remembering. Once Dr. Chun confirmed what the photographs showed, she spent several weeks learning more about the Whitmore family. She searched census files, city directories, death records, and old newspapers. Her research revealed a sad family history that helped explain the origin of the memorial portrait. Thomas and Clara Whitmore were the children of Edward and Margaret Whitmore. Edward ran a textile supply business, and the family lived at 1847 Spruce Street in Philadelphia's Rittenhouse Square area, a comfortable neighborhood at the time. Records from 1900 show that the family owned their home and had a live-in domestic worker, which placed them solidly in the middle class. Clara Elizabeth Whitmore was born on March 3, 1892. Notes found in a family Bible describe her as cheerful and affectionate. She enjoyed singing and had just begun learning piano. A church bulletin from Second Presbyterian Church mentioned that she took part in the children's Easter program in 1897, where she recited a poem. Her older brother, Thomas Edward Whitmore, was born in 1890. School documents show he attended a public school on Locust Street. In early April 1898, Philadelphia experienced a scarlet fever outbreak. Scarlet fever was a serious illness that mainly affected children. It often started with sore throat and fever, followed by a widespread red rash. In difficult cases, it could lead to complications such as pneumonia or damage to organs. A notice in the Philadelphia Evening Bulletin on April 17, 1898, listed the Whitmore home as officially quarantined due to scarlet fever. A red sign would have been placed on their door to warn others to stay away. Records from the city's health department show that Clara passed away on April 22, 1898, at 2:30 in the morning. Her cause of death was listed as scarlet fever with complications of pneumonia. She was 6 years old. Her funeral took place 2 days later at Laurel Hill Cemetery, where she was buried in the family plot. Because of quarantine rules, only close family members could attend. 3 weeks later, on May 15, 1898, the Whitmore family visited the photography studio of J.W. Black and Company on Chestnut Street. They brought a porcelain memorial doll they had commissioned shortly after Clara's passing. The doll had been made by Sarah Mitchell, a local craftsperson known for creating memorial pieces. An invoice found in historical archives shows that the family paid $75 for the doll, a considerable amount equal to about 3 months of middle-class income at the time. The portrait was arranged with care. Thomas wore formal black clothing and a mourning armband. He was posed holding a memorial doll made in his sister's likeness. The studio was set up with mourning curtains, a framed photo of Clara taken before her illness, and fresh flowers. The family intended the portrait to serve several purposes. It documented their mourning, honored Clara's memory, and created a final image of Thomas with a doll that represented his sister. The photograph also preserved the appearance of the doll itself, which could someday fade or be damaged. What happened in the years after 1898 showed how deeply the loss affected the family. Census records from 1900 list a family at the same address, but Margaret no longer had an occupation recorded, likely because she was still dealing with ongoing grief. Edward's business began to struggle, and by 1905, the family had moved to a smaller home on Pine Street. Edward passed away in 1911 at the age of 52. His death certificate lists heart failure, though family letters suggest he never fully recovered after losing Clara. Margaret lived until 1923. She never had more children, and her obituary notes that she requested to be buried holding a small porcelain doll, almost certainly Clara's memorial doll. Thomas grew up, married in 1915, and eventually had 2 daughters. Family memories passed down over the years say he always carried the loss of his sister with him, even as he built a life of his own. Thomas was said to have kept the 1898 memorial photo in his home for the rest of his life. He told his daughters about Clara, the sister he lost at 8 years old. The image of Thomas holding the memorial doll is more than just a piece of history. It is an example of the careful, intentional style of Victorian memorial photography created by professionals who specialize in documenting family loss with respect. J.W. Black and Company, the studio that produced the portrait, was one of Philadelphia's leading photography studios. Founded in 1872 by James Wallace Black, the studio was known for thoughtful and dignified work, especially when families needed help capturing important memories. Photographers who did memorial work in the Victorian era faced both technical and emotional challenges. They had to create images that honored loved ones, supported grieving families, and followed the social expectations of the time, all while working within the limits of late 1800s camera technology. The Whitmore portrait shows this skill clearly. The composition is intentional. Thomas is placed slightly off-center, creating a balanced view while keeping attention on him and the doll. The doll faces the camera directly, making its detailed features easy to see. This was a purposeful choice to highlight the memorial likeness. Soft, even lighting was used, likely from large studio windows covered with white fabric to diffuse the light. This avoided strong shadows and provided enough brightness for the slower photographic materials of that era, which required several seconds of stillness during exposure. Every part of the background was arranged with care. The dark curtains set a quiet tone and provide contrast that makes Thomas and the light-colored doll stand out. A small table holds a framed photo of Clara taken before her illness, creating a link between the doll and the real child. Fresh flowers add a gentle, welcoming touch to the scene. The photographer also paid attention to Thomas's pose and expression. He sits straight but relaxed, holding the doll securely in both arms. His eyes look directly at the camera with a calm, steady expression. The technical quality is excellent. The image is sharp, well-lit, and beautifully toned. The albumin silver print method used by the studio produced rich details, which helped capture the textures of the clothing and the delicate features of the doll. Beyond technique, photographers of this era understood the emotional meaning of their work. For many families, these portraits were the only lasting way to honor a loved one. Photographers were not simply producing pictures. They were creating an object meant to be cherished for many years. The Whitmore portrait shows this level of care. It was not a quick studio job. It was a thoughtful process between the family and skilled craftspeople who understood how important the moment was. The finished photograph would have been delivered mounted on a sturdy card with the studio's name printed in gold. It likely sat in the family's parlor, serving both as a sign of remembrance and as a personal reminder of their love for Clara. Today, the portrait helps us understand Victorian mourning customs, the practice of memorial dolls, and the careful art of memorial photography. Most of all, it stands as a record of one family's love, carried across more than 125 years. When Dr. Chin finished restoring the portrait in March 2023 and shared her research, the image spread quickly on social media and reached millions of people. The public response showed how different modern views can be from Victorian traditions. Some viewers were surprised by the idea of creating a doll in a child's likeness and including it in a family portrait. But as Dr. Chun and other historians explained more about the era's customs and the challenges families faced, understanding grew. As more people learned the story behind the photo, the conversation online shifted. Instead of seeing the image as unsettling, many began to view it as deeply human. It showed a family using the customs available to them at the time to cope with a painful loss. This photograph matters today for several reasons. First, it shows how much our approach to loss has changed. In 1898, the passing of a child was something many families experienced. Mourning was public, structured, and very visible. Today, loss is usually handled in private settings like hospitals, and many people have fewer shared customs to guide them through grief. The Whitmore family's choices, including the doll and the portrait, were not unusual at the time. They were seen as caring, appropriate, and meaningful. Understanding that helps us realize that our modern reactions say more about today's culture than about theirs. Second, the photo highlights how far child health has come. Clara passed away from scarlet fever, a condition that can now be treated with antibiotics. In 1898, it claimed many young lives. The doll and the portrait are reminders of a time when families lived with the daily reality of illnesses that are now easily managed. Third, the image reflects a universal need to hold on to memories. While most families today would not create a memorial doll, people still find ways to remember their loved ones. They create online memorial pages, make tribute videos, wear special jewelry, or keep personal spaces unchanged. The customs evolve, but the need to remember stays the same. Fourth, young Thomas's role in the portrait reminds us that children experience grief in their own way. Including children in meaningful rituals can help them process loss. Many modern counselors even recommend activities similar to what the photograph represents, because they give children a way to stay connected and express their feelings. Finally, the portrait has special meaning for the Whitmore descendants. After Dr. Chin released her research, she heard from Linda Whitmore Harrison, Thomas's great-great-granddaughter. Linda had grown up knowing only bits and pieces of the story, with no photos or details. Seeing the restored image and learning Clara's history was powerful for her. She said it felt like Clara and Thomas's story had finally been recognized after being hidden for more than a century, and that giving the family this connection felt important. The restored portrait is now part of the Library of Congress's collection of significant Victorian memorial photographs. The family also received a high-resolution digital copy. Thomas Whitmore, the 8-year-old boy in the portrait, passed away in 1962 at age 72. He carried the memory of his sister throughout his life. Thanks to the rediscovery of this photograph, that memory has now been preserved for future generations. Clara, who passed away at 6 years old in 1898, is remembered today because of this one carefully made portrait. What first looked like a simple picture of a boy holding a doll turned out to be something much more meaningful, a record of love, loss, and the ways families honor the people they hold dear. Clara's life was short, but through her brother's portrait and the care taken by her family, her memory continues more than 125 years later. Sometimes the photographs that stay with us the longest are the ones that reveal their full meaning only when we take the time to look closely. The story of the Whitmore family and the restored 1898 portrait leaves us with more than a historical record. It invites us to think about how people face loss, how they hold on to memory, and how the past continues to speak long after the moment has passed. The photograph of young Thomas holding the memorial doll shaped in his sister Clara's likeness stands as a reminder that every image has a deeper story waiting to be understood. When the details are lost to time, it is easy to make assumptions. When those details are uncovered, everything changes. Looking back at this portrait with full context makes it clear that the Whitmore family was not doing anything strange or unusual for their time. They were doing what many families did when faced with the unthinkable. They were trying to keep a connection to a child they loved. The memorial doll was not meant to unsettle. It was meant to comfort. The portrait was not intended to create distance. It was taken so the family could feel close to Clara in some small way. What makes this image so powerful today is the contrast between then and now. We live in a time when loss often takes place behind closed doors. People tend to grieve privately, and there are fewer community rituals to help carry them through it. Many families struggle with how to talk about loss with children, how to handle memories, and how to process feelings that do not fade quickly. The Whitmore portrait shows a family who faced grief directly, using the customs they had and the support their society provided. While we may not use the same customs today, the need to remember and the desire to honor loved ones remain as strong as ever. The restoration also brings attention to something many people do not think about. Historical photographs are more than objects. They are pieces of family history that often outlive every person shown in them. For 125 years, this picture sat quietly in an archive, its meaning hidden. To anyone who saw it before restoration, it looked like a boy holding a doll. Without the story, it had lost its emotional weight. Once the details came back into view, the photograph gained a voice again. It became a reminder of a real family, a real child, and a real moment of love during a difficult time. Dr. Chen's work shows the importance of the people behind the scenes who preserve our history. Without her careful restoration and research, the Whitmore family story might have remained unknown. Her work did not simply improve the quality of an old photograph. It restored meaning to an image that had lost its identity. It brought a family story back into focus and gave their experience the dignity it deserved. Through her effort, Thomas and Clara's story reached people who never would have seen it otherwise. The strong public response to the restored photograph also reveals something hopeful. Once viewers understood the context, many responded with empathy rather than discomfort. They saw the portrait as a symbol of love rather than something unsettling. They recognized that families in the past faced challenges that were harder than many people face today. They saw parents and siblings try and keep the memory of a child alive in the only ways they knew. This shift in understanding reminds us that compassion can grow when we take time to learn the full story. The photograph also shows how childhood grief matters. Thomas was only 8 years old when he lost his sister, but the portrait makes it clear that he was part of the family's healing process. He was included, seen, and given a way to hold on to his sister's memory. Modern grief experts now know how important this can be. Children need outlets to process their feelings. They need ways to acknowledge what happened. They need to talk, remember, and feel connected. The Whitmore portrait shows that, in their own way, the family understood this. They did not push Thomas aside or try to hide the reality from him. They allowed him to take part in honoring his sister. There's also something deeply meaningful in how the portrait traveled through time. Thomas carried the photograph for his entire life. His descendants heard stories, even though they lacked the details. When the restored image reached the family again, it filled in the gaps and gave new generations a clearer picture of their family's past. It gave them a connection to someone they had never met but still felt tied to. In this way, the photograph continues to do exactly what the Whitmore family hoped it would do. It preserves memory. This story encourages us to look at the photographs in our own lives differently. Every picture we save, every moment we capture, carries a story that someone in the future may rediscover. Images become more meaningful as time passes. They connect people who never meet. They hold pieces of family history that would otherwise be lost. The Whitmore portrait, once misunderstood, now stands as a reminder of love, resilience, and the importance of remembering. It shows that even in the hardest moments, Families find ways to honor one another. It shows that a single photograph can carry a family's story across more than a century. And it shows that when we take the time to understand the past, we gain a better understanding of ourselves.